It's truly the place of the Senate to have such discussions. The provisions of Article 96 are clear about the Senate's role in supporting and protecting devolution and counties and the governments. And one of the best ways to do it is through legislation. On top of that, I think devolution has come of age. It's been 10 years of devolution, more than 10 years, maybe 10 years and 20 months. And within this period, we've learned a lot of lessons. In the 10 years, I have been in Parliament as an MP, and then as Senator, I've been a Senator longer than I've been a Governor. And so I understand the legislative framework. But even before then, before being an MP, in the year 2011, I authored a book with the International Commission of Jurists that is called the Operational Framework for Fiscal Decentralization. And I wish I carried some copies. If you look at it, what we were doing that time with the International Commission of Jurists was trying to look at the structure of devolution, what Kenya was adopting, how it would work, and how to make it, successful. We were coming from a background where we had a country where decisions were made at the center. And those decisions, of course, in many respects were subjective decisions. And many parts of our country didn't then get development. Following, of course, sessional paper number 10 of 1965 and such other decisions, many parts of the country had been left behind. But not just many parts of the country, even within the capital city and many of our cities, a section of Kenyans would not receive their due. In that operational framework, we discussed, and this was before we even had the first county government, the 4 principles or sub-principles of devolution. Devolution is based on, the overlying principle is called subsidiarity. The subsidiarity principle is that a service is best offered at the lowest level compatible with the beneficiary of that service. And so if there's something that can be done better at the ward than at the county, do it at the ward. If the people can be served better, a decision can be made in Kisii that is better than being made in Nyanza, the former Nyanza province, let it be made and let it be executed. And that was because a one-size-fits-all approach was not working for this country. Now what we have seen is that even within counties, subsidiarity is important. And I'll get to that a bit later when I give the experience of Nairobi. The sub-principles under subsidiarity then, number 1 is the expenditure responsibilities that is found in the 4th schedule of the Constitution. Then what does the county have to do? Vis-a-vis what does the national government have to do? When you look at the expenditure responsibilities, it tells you those functions. And then you go to chapter 12 of the Constitution, the revenue raising capacity. What is the county allowed to raise vis-a-vis what is the national government allowed to raise, what fees, what taxes. And I've seen there's an attempt to strangle that from counties. We do that through our finance bill. There's an attempt that all finance bills must go through Parliament as well. There was mention of that. I don't know if that bill has come. And so once you do the 2, that I'm supposed to do work worth 10 billion, but I'm only allowed to raise 5 billion, is when you go to the 3rd principle, which is the intergovernmental fiscal transfers. That has been the most contentious and unfortunately has been the focus of devolution over the last 10 years. Amran behind you will tell you when we were debating the formula for giving counties money, it was very hot. And myself and the governor of Makueni now came up with the formula that we have today. We call it Y equals A plus B. And A was what counties are already receiving. Amran, you remember that? Because there was an attempt for counties to lose what they were already receiving. And so some of us from counties that were gaining at that time said, despite us gaining 100 million, it doesn't serve devolution for Nairobi to gain 1% of its budget and for another county to lose 30% of its budget from the nationally raised revenue, as opposed to how much we can raise, and number 2, how much we need to spend. And I'll give you an example that I was mentioning earlier. Nairobi, for instance, receives around 20 billion from the nationally raised revenue. Every month, that comes to maybe 1.7 billion. The salaries alone in Nairobi is 1.3 billion per month, going to 1.4. So if you're to depend on just that intergovernmental transfer, we will not be able to undertake the programs we're undertaking in the city. We will not be able to, even fuel our vehicles. We will not be able to feed children as we're doing. We will not be able to collect garbage. We will not be able to do many things. And so that third principle needs to be understated, and the costing of functions in principle 1 and 2 need to be done. So by the time you're getting into number 3, in fact, world over, if you look at our system, it's close to South Africa and India. The intergovernmental transfer is supposed to fill a gap, but people have made it the main thing. It's supposed to fill a gap between what you raise and what you're supposed to do. And then finally, the fourth principle is subnational borrowing. That counties then be allowed to raise their own revenue through borrowing. That has been limited. The only county that did a bond was Laikipia. It was limited in terms of the percentage that they can raise. Subnational borrowing, there are many, we in Nairobi are pursuing a green bond, for instance. There are many people who would want to invest in Nairobi. They would want to put money in infrastructure and get a return later. Counties are constrained from doing that. Now, having said that as background, Nairobi County is special because it is the county and the capital city of Kenya. It is also the diplomatic center of this region and indeed of our continent. The leadership we've taken on many areas, including climate. And so it needs to be looked at specially. Nairobi County has a GDP of $28 billion. A GDP of $28 billion is more than twice the GDP of a country like Rwanda, which is 11 billion. Is more than 10 times the GDP of a country like Burundi, which is 2 billion. But Nairobi is not able to deal at that level. If Nairobi was a country, it would have been richer than Kenya. It would be top 10 in Africa. But of course, the law of averages puts us as everyone. And recently, Chairman, I was talking to my friend who's a country director of one of the Bretton Woods institutions, and I told him, why can't you give Nairobi direct support with a GDP of 28 billion and a population of 5 million? You have to give some countries with less than half of that or a quarter of that direct support. And he said, actually, you're right. And now they're starting to give Nairobi direct support for the programs that we run. We have a population of 5 million people, and there's a difference of day and night population. Part of the problems we have with the formula of transfers is that people are counted at night, yet they seek services during the day. So people seek services in Nairobi during the day. You go to hospital during the day, you use the roads during the day, all the functions, but then at night they go to Kiambu, they go to Kajiado. And so when you do the census, you find Nairobi has a population of 3.8 million, but really it's 5 million people. I opened the first eye hospital in Kenya recently, in Umoja 2. 45% of those who serve are not from Nairobi. And they declared they're from different regions because there is no public eye hospital in Kenya. Okay. The one in Umoja 2 is the first public eye hospital. The other two is Lions Hospital, which is Lions, it's not public, and the PCA Kikuyu. And so those are some of the challenges that we deal with. Now, if you look at the Urban Areas and Cities Act, now to bring it to the discussion that we're having today, it talks about principles of management and governance of urban areas and cities. Of course, the reasoning of this act is to provide for first classification and the governance and management of urban areas and cities and the criteria for establishing those. When you look at the criteria, and that is why we find solace in section 6 of this act, when you look at the criteria, Nairobi doesn't qualify because the criteria for establishing cities is mainly based on population. It talks about 250,000 people. If that was the criteria, Nairobi would have 20 cities because we are 5 million. And so it's not practical in terms of municipalities, in terms of how you'd structure the capital. But Section 6 and Section 6 of this Act then talks about management and infrastructure in the capital city. It says the capital city of Kenya is Nairobi. Of course, it shall be governed and managed in the same manner as a county government. And then it talks about what the county must do. Allow me at this point, Chair, to touch on what has been an ongoing debate nationally, and even during the BBI discussion. There was the idea of making Nairobi not be a county and let Nairobi be managed as the seat of national government. Of course, we opposed that, and I gave a presentation. And I gave history of different countries where the most bustling economic capital was alive and vibrant, but the seat of national government was then moved. So if you go to Tanzania, Dar es Salaam and Dodoma. If you go to Australia, you got Sydney and Melbourne and all that, but they moved to Canberra and they created this capital. If you go to Nigeria, Lagos was always the active economic capital, but they moved from Lagos and went to Abuja and created the seat of government. If you go to the US, you had New York and you had all of this, but they moved to Washington, D.C. And Washington, D.C., the District of Columbia, has no senator, it has no representation, it is just the seat of national government. And I told them that time, if devolution is the biggest gift to this country, that lady in Mutwini in the market, that person in Kayole, also needs that gift. 10% of this country is in Nairobi, and so they must never be denied the gift of devolution. And it has really sorted out many things in the capital, which I would go into. And so this provision in Section 6, I find it as a pregnant provision of the law that has never been implemented. It says that the capital city in subsection 3 shall provide infrastructure necessary to sustain the seat of national government, office of diplomatic missions, which you do, efficient transport network connecting to rural areas, towns and other local, regional, international cities, and commerce and industry. It then says the capital shall decentralize its functions and provisions of its services to the extent that it is efficient and practical to do so. Now, Chairman and Honorable Senators, we are smack in the middle of implementing this 6-4 by providing for boroughs in the county of Nairobi. We've undertaken a whole year of public participation. We've gone down the city because the needs, for instance, of Kayole, the person doing roads in Kayole should not be the same person thinking of roads in Westlands. The person trying to sort out waste management in Karen should not also have the headache of South Sea or rather of Isili, And that is why we had proposed 5 boroughs: Nairobi North, East, West, South and Central. But after extensive public participation, we found that we need to have 6 boroughs. And so we are having Nairobi South Central as well. South East, which will bring together Embakasi East constituency and Embakasi South constituency, connecting to Makadara. Now, once we do that, we want to have city managers or borough managers. We've already gone through the process of recruiting. We've shortlisted. And this borough manager, for instance, in Nairobi South or Nairobi Southeast, should be able to then sit with the people of Nairobi Southeast, have the resident areas associations, have the different players to say what is our priority here. The same way a one-size-fits-all budget doesn't work at the national level, even at the county level, we have found. During El Nino, for instance, last year, Nairobi didn't flood because we're able to have young people, 3,500 of them, in every part of the city clearing drainage. In fact, the only problem now is that it's the rivers that have burst their banks. But the normal roads, the water, it'll flood, but then it flows. But what we found that has made us successful is that in every part of the city, I have empowered my sub-county administrators, sub-county engineers, sub-county disaster management officers to be able not just to make decisions, but to have the money to make that decision. Such that they don't have to come to City Hall to ask for a backhoe or for an excavator to open up a blocked drainage. they can make the decision at that level. Now, if you bring it to the borough, it's even better. Because as we do the budgets, then we know that the priority of Nairobi West, in terms of its infrastructure, in terms of programs, is X. This is their capacity to raise money. For instance, if you look at Isili and Nairobi Central raise more money than a whole Kigali or even close to Cape Town, you know, on their own. And so they should be able to make those decisions at that level. So in that process, we would want amendments in this law to recognize provisions to allow us to now legally anchor beyond just this statement, because this is what I'm using to anchor the boroughs, but beyond this, to actually provide further details of how to establish these levels. Kakamega County, which is also my ancestral home, with the Senator Catherine Muma, that's why you had her calling me a different name. She happens to be my cousin. Had to pass a law within the county assembly to provide for village units. That is the only provision in the County Government Act that says if you want to provide further units like village units, provide for a law in the county assembly. But for boroughs or any other, it gives the discretion to the county executive. Now, if you look at some of the services we have to offer in Nairobi, they are beyond just the fourth schedule. The worst part that Nairobi went through was when Nairobi resigned its functions to the national government. I think that is possibly a very dark period. And in this financial year, with 2 months left, I've already surpassed last year, which was the highest ever in the history of Nairobi, apart from 2015-16, which was 12.7. And so without understanding that, then you'll hear those who are anti-devolution saying, no, let's give it back to the national government. And let me explain some of the functions we have to do. Today we're feeding children in Nairobi. School feeding is not a function. It's not mentioned in the fourth schedule. In fact, the only mention that comes close to it is children welfare programs. That is a county function. We found that 1 out of 4 children in Nairobi don't go to school because of hunger. A lot of the efforts in the past for feeding children were sent towards arid counties and semi-arid counties, forgetting that urban poverty many times is worse than rural poverty. We keep saying Nairobi ni shamba ya mawe. If you don't have money, you not have food, you have nowhere to stay. In the last 19 months, what I've been able to do with the county government of Nairobi, we've built 10 kitchens, central kitchens, that each produce 10 to 15,000 plates a day. We've been able to now break ground on another 7 that I've done. And today, we're feeding 184,000 children every single day. 184,000 children at 5 shillings a meal.
5 shillings.
5 shillings. Meaning we have had to invest in infrastructure and we've had to invest in the subsidy because it's subsidized. We're very lucky we've had donors and the supporters who come. I've seen a story that we can't account for donor money. And it's because the donor money goes straight to our implementing partner. We don't receive it as Nairobi County. The money goes straight to Food for Education. It's a foundation that has been doing this for a while. But that money is used to pay for those children who can't afford the 5 shillings. Because there are people in Nairobi who are so poor, they can't afford that 5 shillings. What you find, and I would really invite this committee to come and see that program. In fact, this week when schools were postponed, in all the camps after the flooding, we're giving them food, a hot meal, lunch and dinner from these kitchens. Every day, the 31 camps around the city, because they have the capacity to feed 184,000 people, and there are only 14,000 people in the camps. So why not use that capacity to feed them? But I would interest you to come and see these kitchens and how it works. School enrollment in Nairobi was 250,000 only. There were only 250,000 children in school when we started. Today there are 310,000 children in just less than a year, because we broke ground in August of last year. 310,000 children are going to school above the 250,000. They're receiving that hot meal every day. Enrollment is more than 100%. Attendance is 100%. And performance has gone up. When we were issuing our bursaries and scholarships earlier, a few months ago, there's a young girl called Mabel who had been failing in her school because she was in and out of school. She wasn't consistently in school. But in her third term of class 8, she was in school every day because of the school feeding program. She was wearing the watch that we normally have for school feeding. And she said she would never remove it because of the food. She became one of the top performers in Nairobi. She's going to Loreto Convent. And she would never have had a chance to go to school. Now, how do I cost that? It's not in the fourth schedule. It is a need that Nairobi has. It's a need that capital cities have. I would want the Senate to help us look at financing of capital cities.